What is not a productive discussion is deciding that you're going to suddenly, which a lot of people on social media are saying, okay, take away all the guns. All right, so let's be honest here. There are something like 350 million guns in America, and you are telling me that the government is going to confiscate all of them? Do you know who's not going to turn their guns over, by the way? Criminals. And also, by the way, there's the whole Second Amendment to deal with. So if you want to argue, hey, we need to repeal the Second Amendment, that's a political move that you could potentially try to follow. I don't think you have a very good chance of making that a reality. What I'm more interested in is how do we prevent issues like these? And to me, how did the guy get into the school, and what sort of warning signs were missed en route? Was there any sort of security that existed inside of the school? And if so, why did they not do their job? Okay, why did they not protect the innocent inside of that school if they didn't? Those are questions that should be answered. What Beto is doing is, frankly, an absolute embarrassment. It's why he's never going to win a race in Texas. It's why Governor Greg Abbott is going to destroy him in November. Beto is imagine you're a parent and you're trying, or a family member, and you're trying to listen to the governor give the latest updates about what happened and how your children ended up losing their lives. And then Beto grandstands inside of that press conference, providing the latest news and details inside of the press conference. It's an embarrassment. Frankly, if Beto wants to have a press conference, he can call one anywhere, I'm sure, and some media will show up and be involved. The fact that he would show up in that situation at that point in time and force himself to be escorted out of the press conference that is giving us details about the 19 kids who lost their lives is flat out outrageous and an embarrassment, and a further example of what is happening all too often, which is immediately whenever an incident happens, it's immediately made political. If this shooter had been white, it would have been turned into an act of white supremacy. Shooter is Hispanic, so it turns into a gun control discussion. It's embarrassing how quickly the politics and the narrative is put in place here, okay? So, as part of this, you may have seen Steve Kerr addressing in the pregame his opinions on the shootings. Steve Kerr is demanding more laws be passed to make people in America safer. This is interesting because Steve Kerr is a perfect epitomization of what social media has created, which is people demanding emotional responses, even if they contradict and conflict with their prior emotional responses. Steve Kerr said 2 years ago, in the wake of George Floyd, that he wanted all police officers to be pulled out of schools. He said, and I quote, I'm going to read a couple of quotes from you. He said, "We're pushing for community-driven process so that we can have a collective safety plan." That was somebody else who's speaking. And Steve Kerr said that he wanted for police officers to be pulled out of the schools. So, okay, hold on. Steve Kerr is going to show up before the Dallas Mavericks game and lecture everyone on the fact that there needs to be immediate legislation passed to make everyone safer, when 2 years ago, Steve Kerr responded to the George Floyd incident by saying he wanted all police officers pulled outside of schools because kids didn't feel safe there with police officers present. Well, wait a minute. My position, I think, is the right one. We should have more school security officers, police officers inside of the school who are armed. My own kids in elementary school go to a school where there is an armed police officer inside of that school all day long, every day. All the kids know the officer. She is fantastic. I just went to the 5th grade graduation ceremony for my school. The police officer spoke there. They love her. They gave her a gift, the 5th graders did, at the end of the school year. she helps to ensure that my kids are safer in that school than they otherwise would be. I want more officers like her in more schools all over the country. A real media would have responded to Steve Kerr's emotional outburst by saying, wait a minute, Steve Kerr, didn't you 2 years ago emotionally respond to George Floyd and say that you wanted all police officers pulled out of schools? You wanted police defunded. So now you want more laws passed in order to make kids safer. Explain to me why you have the exact opposite perspective now. You said schools will be safer without police officers inside of them. We need those police officers gone. There's a school shooting. And now you are arguing there needs to be more laws passed to make kids safer. I want you to logically explain to me why those two positions that you are adopting here are not hypocritical. Not one single sports media member asked Steve Kerr about this. And let me tell you something. If you are going to decide to get political and enter the political arena, to me, all those cowards in the sports media who didn't say a word to you have an obligation to quiz you on your political statements. 2 years ago, you didn't want police officers allowed in schools to protect kids. Now you're demanding that senators pass legislation to help protect kids. Isn't one of the best ways to protect kids to have armed security inside of those schools? We have armed security in banks. We have armed security in grocery stores sometimes now. We have armed securities in all sorts of retail establishment, malls and whatnot. I don't understand why it wouldn't also make sense to have armed security inside of a school. Steve Kerr is an emotional hypocrite. And what he said yesterday went viral, and sports media were sharing it like crazy. Ask yourself why I'm the only person who pointed out Steve Kerr's hypocrisy here. It's because we're dealing with a rigged media. Sports media has the same opinion of an athlete or a coach. They grab it, they share it widely. They are basically the publicist of the athlete or of the coach. No one actually does what the job of a media person by and large should be, which is to speak truth to power. No one. Now, there's all sorts of opinions people can have. But if we're going to treat Steve Kerr like he's some sort of authority on ways to deal with violence in America, then at a minimum, his contradictory impulses should be brought to bear. What's not contradictory here is Steve Kerr is reacting emotionally as opposed to logically. A logical response is what I'm saying. Hey, I'm in favor of armed security inside of schools. I want more police on the streets. I think that will lower levels of violence for everyone all over this country. An emotional response is Steve Kerr's pull all the police officers out of schools. And then on top of that, I also demand there be new legislation passed to make everyone safer. Well, you're arguing two different sides here. Either police are making people safer or they aren't. Either laws passed make people safer or they don't. And the fact that no one pushes back against Steve Kerr is the epitome of what's going wrong here. See, what Beto did and what Steve Kerr did is they behaved in a way that gets rewarded on social media, right? Being rational, being logical, actually walking through the data and discussing in a complex fashion like an adult, big, serious issues typically doesn't work on social media. It works here. It works on Clay and Buck. It works on Outkick. It's why we have such massive audiences. But just yelling and screaming, that goes viral on social media because it provokes an emotional response. And it makes you feel better, like children feel better when they throw fits, but it isn't productive. What social media does, if you look at Beto and if you look at Steve Kerr, is it rewards childlike emotional fits. it doesn't actually reward adult discussions of complex issues. And if you even stop for a moment to discuss it, you're in a tiny minority. Think about this. Think about the number of people you saw sharing Steve Kerr's hypocritical take on the school shooting, and how many other people even mentioned his prior take on George Floyd, which was get rid of all police officers in schools. Almost no one. Why is that? Shouldn't both sides of this be discussed? And look, I'll give Steve Kerr credit, just like I'll give anybody credit. Here's the thing. Nobody's in favor of more violence to young kids at school. That is something we all agree on. So when Joe Biden comes out and immediately makes this political, or Steve Kerr immediately makes this political, or Beto O'Rourke immediately make things political, before we even know all of the facts in this situation, who is actually being more productive and making kids safer? I think about this stuff all the time because I actually have kids in elementary school, because I left my radio show today to go pick up my kids because it was a half day and this was the last day of school for the year for my first grader and my fifth grader. They're downstairs right now, probably playing Minecraft, probably playing FIFA, probably playing whatever video game you can imagine. And I'm going to finish this show and I'm going to go downstairs. I'm going to say, hey, you guys need to do something productive with the rest of your day. You can't just sit around and play video games for 8 hours. I'm not sure I'm going to win that argument on the first day they get out for school for the summer, but that's what they're going to do. So I think about this all the time, not only to protect my own kids, but to protect all kids. I want the same thing for all kids that my kids have had in their elementary school. Okay? Armed security and a lockdown school that makes it very difficult, if not impossible, for someone to get inside with a weapon without being confronted by armed security or without the police being able to respond and keep them from engaging in acts of extreme violence.